I'm super stoked to show you guys the project that we have going on today. You're going to build a text editor online that will code and compile JavaScript with all these special features like syntax highlighting, line numbering, and it's going to be great. All you have to figure out is who you're going to show to blow their minds. Now I'll show you how to code this. Let's get right into it. So if I just type const greet equals hello world, I want to spell that correctly, and call this variable greet, and I press run, we see that we have the output of what we declared. And it's not limited to just string expressions. I can declare a function, so call this add2. Use the arrow function syntax with 2 parameters, n1 and 2, and it will be the sum of 2 numbers, as you probably guessed. Call it with 3 and 4, so our output should be 7. And we'll see missing. So we see that it's working because we have a syntax error. We run it, and now we get the correct output. And if you really don't believe me, we do it one more time, and we get 8. Now we can clear this output, run it again. And as we can see, we have a pretty functioning online code editor. So to install the necessary code that we need for our project, specifically the CodeMirror API or code, we need to actually go to a site called CodeMirror.net. Type that into your browser, press enter, and you'll be directed to this page. Now, what you need to do is right underneath this is CodeMirror and this little nice looking text editor that we will eventually have in our own application. You will see a get the current version and a link to that, which you should then click to download, and you will get in your downloads directory in your PC. Then what you should do is right click and extract all, and you should have a folder in whichever path you want to make that, and extract this CodeMirror zip file to that folder, and then you'll be complete. So I am assuming at this point you have downloaded the necessary CodeMirror files and folders into that root directory that you've created for this application. And to get started, what we want to do is we want to create a index.html file in that root directory. And the fast way you can do this in VS Code is you type exclamation mark and enter, and you get boilerplate. And I'll just add an h1 tag. So, let's add an h1 tag so that we see that it is working on our server. And what I want you to do is I want you to go to codemirror.com, and under manual, I want you to copy and paste the code provided under basic usage. So Control C on, we'll give a tag CodeMirror import, I guess we could say, and copy it, tab it over, and let's go to our live server. And if I reload this, I get a bunch of warnings. So cannot get, resource was blocked. So all these warnings are telling us that basically it doesn't know where to find. The initial warnings cannot get. It doesn't know where to find these paths that we are pointing to. And the reason for that is if we go to our CodeMirror code, our folder that we downloaded, we see this lib folder right here on the left. So what we need to do is copy this relative path, copy relative path. I will leave it in a comment here, And so what we can do here then is copy it at the beginning of every single import, href or source tag attribute, I should say, and add a / after. Control V /. Now if we go back to our live server, we see that we no longer have those warnings. So everything is good and set up and ready to go. And now we can begin actually coding our application. So we have imported our CodeMirror links, I guess you could say. So now the next thing to do is our code imports is create our application. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a script tag, give it a source of app.js. So maybe in our root directory for now, we will create an app.js. Leave it blank for now. And in our HTML, in our body, we want to create a div. And this is going to be our container. So I'll give it a class of grid-container. Now, in our grid container, we want two divs, one for the input and one for the editor and one for the shell. So I'll say div, we'll give it a class equal to code area. And in that, I'll have another div, actually, which I'll give it a class equal to code area header. And finally, I'll just pass in a text area where our code will be, and I'll give it class equals CodeMirror text area. Perfect. Now we want two of these, one for our input and output. And in our, you might want to have this be class instead of class with one S. I'll pass two elements. One will be a title, and we'll give it editor, and a button, which will give the text content of run. And we will just copy this and pass it into our second div, but instead of it being an editor, we'll say this is shell. And we'll say give the button a clear text content. Now let's go to our live server, load it, and we see that we have these two divs, an editor and a shell, both with their corresponding buttons. So everything has worked so far. Now what we need to do is begin to create our JavaScript application so we can configure these text areas where we want our code to be. So I'm going to create a window.onLoad function. And the first thing I need to do is grab both the input and the output text areas. Well, you do that using the query selector all method. If you remember, I passed a similar class to both of them, and it was CodeMirror -text area. Now what we do is we are going to create these configurations. So we do this saying const editor equals, we grab the CodeMirror object and we apply the fromTextArea method to it, and we're going to apply, the editor will be on this input text area. Now we'll pass an object with all the customizations and their properties. So we'll have line numbers set to true. And we'll do the same for output. And the only change is we will assign it to a variable called shell, because that more accurately reflects what that will be. And I will set this line numbers to false, as I do not particularly want those numberings. Now if we refresh this, I'll close the console, we have this effect. So if I zoom in, you can see const app equals hello world. We got all these code editing features for free, like line numbering and syntax highlighting. So that has worked. And if I press here, you can't see anything right now, but I actually have the same configuration, except the only difference is there's no line numbering in our shell. So this is pretty good, but right now we have a pretty, it wouldn't be crazy to say that it's pretty gross looking. It's pretty bare bones in the styling. So what we want to do next is apply styling, have them be side by side in our HTML. And then after that, we will begin to build the business logic of our application. So that'll be in the next video. So what we want to do is create, okay, no, count me in now. What we want to do is create our link and give it a relationship equal to style sheet. Have the href equal to styles.css. Close that tag, and the first thing I want to do is give it a body, the body tag, a font family. Font family of, give it Arial, an Arial font family. Next, let's give it a background color of azure. Perfect. Now what we want to do is create that grid display so that we can have those two text areas side by side. And that was the class of grid-container. And display will be set to grid. Say the grid template columns will be, let's just say 60% for the editor and 40% for our shell. And let's give it a grid gap of 20 pixels. Then in our code area class, which is the div for the code area, I want the background color to be equal to white so that we can see what is going on. I want the border to be rounded, so I'll give a border radius of 0. Let's give a border radius of, let's try 1em. I think that will be good. And let's of course say text align center. And let's see what we have so far. Now, if we look very, very closely, I'm not sure if you guys can see that, so maybe I'll change the background color to be a little darker. So let's just give it to be blue. We see that we have this rounded colors effect. We have our const app is equal to hello world. And we actually have created a bug using the global style of text align center. So I do not want to pass that in there. I want to pass that into the code-area header div and pass that text align center so that our text is not aligned in the actual CodeMirror object itself. And we see that we've fixed that. Const app equals hello world. That is good. And we see now that our titles are aligned in the center. Now what I might also want to do is actually create a display grid. And we'll give it, again, the grid template columns. We'll give it how about 50% and then 30%. And let's go to this. And we see that now our buttons and titles are now displayed side by side. So that's good too. Now we have a nice rounded corner on the top, but not the bottom. And that's because we need to add just a little bit of padding to the bottom. So in our code area, I'll say padding bottom, and let's give it 5%. Now that looks much better. And what I still should do is give this a width of 90%. Give our grid container a padding left of, let's say, 2%. Let's see if that has made everything much more aligned. Yep, it looks pretty close to centered. And all that's left is to style these buttons. So what I'm actually going to do is what I always do is go to Css Button Styles. And we will just steal this styling. So we'll grab this. We'll copy and paste that into our code instead of reinventing the wheels ourselves, especially when it comes to styling like button. So we'll go back to our application, and we already have much nicer buttons. So maybe I'll just give it a margin at the top of 1% and margin bottom of 1%. Now, if you saw, I forgot to add a colon, so that will not register until I fix that. And now we have some pretty nice buttons. So I say that it's pretty styled well enough. You could maybe add a header like we had in that demo. You could maybe make these divs larger by expanding their height. But for now, we'll just keep it as it is and move on to the business logic. So now we have applied the styling to our application. So the final thing to do is to create that run effect. So what we should do first is create an event listener for when the user clicks run. So the very first thing we should do is, I'll just add a little note configs here, is we should grab both buttons. So run and clear, just like we did above using the query selector all method. And we will just query selector all buttons. Now what I'll do is I'll add an event listener to the run. I say for click, pass in the callback parameter, and for now we'll just console.log running. And we can just copy this and paste it onto the next line. And instead of run, have it be for the clear button. And of course, in our callback function, just say clear, clearing. Now let's just make sure that these events are registering. So right click inspect and go to the console. So I click run and I get a running output. I click clear and I get a clearing output. So we know we have done that part properly. All we have to do now is, so when we run the application, we want to grab that code inside of our editor, which we have this variable editor for, grab the value for it, and then run it. So let's just comment out this clear event listener for now. And in our callback, what we should do is so what we want to do is replace our callback with grabbing the text from our editor and running it. Now we can use this using the eval function in JavaScript. So I'll say const code to run, and we'll grab it from our editor using the getValue method. Then what we must do, for now, we'll use an expensive and inefficient method of displaying that output. So I will say shell dot set value, and within this value, so we're setting the value of the shell, we're going to pass the eval method, which runs JavaScript code as a string in the parameter, and that of course is the code to run. And we will test this and make sure everything is working. So say const greet equals hello world, and call greet. So we should see hello world output to the shell. And if we do it again, we see that that's setting the value. You can't see it because it's resetting the value, but if I said hello world again, we see that that is the current value of the shell. Now, what we want to do instead of that is we want to, instead of setting the value each time of that code to run, we want the previous code and we want the current code that we just ran in a sort of lining up, line by line, I mean to say, output. So what we'll do is we'll call the shell.range using the replace range method, and we will call as the output parameter, we'll pass in a $sign to be the key identifier for every new line, and we'll append that to the return value of the eval method in JavaScript and pass in the code to run as a parameter just like before. And the second parameter in the replace range is the shell dot, the code mirror dot position of the shell dot last line. So we want to append it to the last line. So now let's try running this. Make sure we didn't. Once app equals app, run it. CodeMirror.pause is not a function. I think it is uppercase instead of lowercase. Now let's try that again. Const app equals app. Shell.replace range. I believe that this is so. And we see that we have the output. So const app equals hello world. Call app. Let's replace this. And we see that we have hello world. Now the only issue is that we're not getting new lines, we're actually just appending to the last line, which is that line. So what we should do is create our own last line by appending a new line. Now we will see that we get the desired output. Const app equals app, and call app. Sorry. So what is going on here is we have accidentally passed that into the eval function. And now if we rerun that, it should work. App and call app. And all is working well as desired. Now, one issue that we have, however, is what if I created a syntax error? What would happen? Nothing would run, and we would simply get an uncaught syntax error. So what we should do then is wrap this in a try and an except. Control Z, try, or not an except, I mean a catch exception, or error, copy this, try this, accept error, and then what we want to do is instead of pasting the eval function, we want to paste the error that we've actually passed as a parameter. Now if we rerun this, our program will no longer crash, and we'll actually be able to give a more enjoyable programming experience to our user. So that works perfectly. Give a syntax error, and now we see syntax error missing equal sign in const declaration. So everything is working for running the code. We just need to add the extra clearing functionality, and then we're done. So As you remember before, we commented this out, so we'll just add an event listener, and this will be very, very quick. So I'll just declare an arrow function to make it more syntactically tight. And what we need to do is we just need to clear that output. So we can do this using the setValue method. And as you probably guessed, we'll pass in nothing to the setValue method. Now, if we run this and say greet equals we are done, and greet, run it a bunch of times, we're done, clear it, and it works just as expected.